So after going through Elemental Shaman and Destruction Warlock in my class overview videos, we're going over a melee DPS spec. I am choosing Enhancement first because many other specs are better than Enhancement in certain areas. Some other specs are going to be the flavor of the month for raids and for Mythic Plus, better than Enhancement. The reason why Enhancement gets a spotlight now is because it's one of the specs that changed the most. Yes, Demon Hunter is still going to be very, very wanted in Mythic Plus, but making a video about Demon Hunter when they are essentially almost the same compared to how much Enhancement changed didn't feel right. So let's go over Enhancement and take the pros and cons video I made for ranking the specs for Castronatria into an actual specialized video just for Enhancement. Enhancement has been reworked to be a priority-based spec where they don't really have a rotation, they don't really have something to follow every time to fall into this, cyclic rhythm, like if they were, for example, a rogue. It's more of whatever needs to be done right now, right at the moment, with the multiple small systems they have. They have their Storm Strike with a cooldown on its own, doesn't synergize or change based on other things. They have Lava Lash, again, cooldown on its own. They have 2 shocks, Flame Shock and Frost Shock, on the same cooldown that they can use, and then they have Crush Lightning on its own cooldown. It's entirely cooldown based. You have 8 seconds on Storm Strike, you have 12 seconds of Lava Lash, you have 6 seconds on your shocks, you have 9 seconds of your Crush Lightning. It's all cooldown based. The old Shaman, the old Enhancement Shaman was known as a slot machine, where you rolled the dice from Stormbringer and you hoped to get 3 Storm Strike resets. Back to back to back to back. Your dream rotation as Enhancement in single target was Storm Strike, Storm Strike, Storm Strike, Storm Strike, Storm Strike. Your dream rotation as Enhancement in AoE was Crush Lightning, Storm Strike, Storm Strike, Storm Strike, Storm Strike, Storm Strike, Crush Lightning, Storm Strike, Storm Strike, Storm Strike, Storm Strike. Now it's changed. Now your Stormbringer is going to proc your free Storm Strike far less. It's not going to be a slot machine RNG based build anymore. Your Stormbringer passive is only going to proc off of your special attacks, which is going to be much fewer times because you're not using them as often as you use your auto attacks. And then a return of a passive, an old passive with a few more additions, Maelstrom Weapon. Now your melee attacks from your melee weapon are going to have a chance to stack Maelstrom Weapon stacks up to 10. Every stack is going to be 20% more damage and 20% less cast time of your next spell. And you can consume 5 at a time. 5 meaning 100% more damage, 100% less cast time. Meaning instacast Lightning Bolt or instacast Chain Lightning that do double damage. Your Stormbringer and your Storm Strike damage and your Maelstrom Weapon and your spell, enhancements are going to be changing around a lot how your talents look. This is one of the primary bonuses, one of the primary pluses I gave to Enhancement when I rated them in Mythic Plus, when I rated them in raids. It was the same thing. They are essentially the most versatile of all melee specs. They are the ones that can choose their damage profile and the way in which they do damage, sustain damage, burst, AoE, clave single target, the most out of all specs. Compare them to Outlaw Rogue and how many options does Outlaw Rogue have to play single target, or Demon Hunter. How many options do they have for primary single target abilities over the choices they have for AoE? Enhancement, on the other hand, has tons of options. One of the great examples are the second and fourth row, the level 25 and the level 35 row. You have Hot Hand, which specifically synergizes with your melee auto attacks to give a chance to massively empower your Lava Lash. 75% cooldown reduction and 100% more damage. At the same time, you have Storm Flurry, which is going to give essentially Wind Fury to your Storm Strike. Then you can go to your legendaries and see these types of synergies further increased, because you have Legacy of the Frost Switch, which is going to make consuming 5 stacks of Maelstrom instantly reset the cooldown of Storm Strike. Very powerful, because as I mentioned, Stormbringer is not going to reset your cooldown of Storm Strike that much anymore. So this is very powerful and synergizes very well with Storm Strike. But then you also have Primal Lava Actuators. Every time your Flame Shock ticks, your Lava Lash damage is increased by 12% and the cooldown is reduced by 0.5. These are very different. They do very different things, and they can synergize very well with different talents. You even have something like Ice Strike, which I like a lot because in the way it works, like the possibilities it opens for you. Ice Strike does mediocre damage, but is going to instantly reset the cooldown of your Frost Shock and Flame Shock. Now, this means you can Flame Shock one target, you can use your Primordial Wave Covenant to Flame Shock a second target, and then you can Ice Strike to reset the cooldown of Flame Shock and Flame Shock a third target. So right off the bat, you can have 3 Flame Shocks active. And because you have Primal Lava Actuators, now the Lava Lash cooldown is constantly being reduced, and then the damage is being increased constantly. It is very nice. It's very smooth and very cool on, 2 to 3 target fights, where it is going to be very powerful. On the other hand, you could use Ice Strike to focus on your Frost Shock, that we haven't talked much about. Flame Shock is a DOT AOT, you know, it's longer time to do damage. It's not going to be very powerful in Mythic Plus where you're in a group with a Demon Hunter and a Frost Mage and they want to burn everything down. Your fancy little spread of Flame Shock is not going to work. What you can do instead is talent into Hailstorm. Hailstorm is going to massively empower the next Frost Shock after you consume Maelstrom weapon stacks and make your Frost Shock AoE. 5 Maelstrom weapon stacks means 175% more damage on your next Frost Shock and 6 targets total are being hit. So you can enter a fight with 5 Maelstrom weapon stacks, the pack in Mythic Plus is being pulled, you can insta-cast Chain Lightning and then AoE Frost Shock. As you use these abilities, you gain more Maelstrom weapon stacks, so you can Ice Strike to instantly reset the cooldown of your Frost Shock and use it again for more AoE. Very high burst with this setup. But maybe you don't want to burst AoE, maybe you don't want to hit 6 targets, maybe you want to be specified and specialized for 1 target. Instead of taking Hailstorm, you can just go for Elemental Assault. Flat out more damage on your Storm Strike. And make your Storm Strike generate 1 Maelstrom weapon stack, which is very powerful when you're playing with Legacy of the Frost Switch, which is going to be your Storm Strike legendary, because this is going to reset the cooldown of your Storm Strike when you're using 5 stacks of Maelstrom. So using a talent which also gives you 1 stack of Maelstrom when you use Storm Strike is going to be very powerful for this cycle. It's essentially discounting the reset of your Storm Strike to 4 Maelstrom weapon stacks, because whenever you use Storm Strike, you instantly start with 1 Maelstrom weapon stack. It's very good for the build. Later on, in the 3 and in the level 45 row, you have another type of synergy and damage profile options, because Sundering is very good in AoE burst, Stormkeeper is very good in single target burst, and Crushing Storm is very good in sustained damage and can be turned into a rotational ability, extra ability to use in single target, because now it does enough damage to be worthwhile in single target. Stormkeeper used to also consume Maelstrom weapon stacks, so you could gain 100% more damage on your next Chain Lightning through Maelstrom weapon stacks and 150% more damage of your next Chain Lightning through Stormkeeper, making it extremely powerful. This has been fixed since then. Now Stormkeeper doesn't eat your Maelstrom weapon stacks anymore, so it's a little bit weaker. In AoE, it's still better for burst single target, but now this is another row that gives you options. Burst AoE, burst single target, sustained AoE. Admittedly, the only weaker part of the enhancement talent tree is going to be the 40 and the 50 row. The level 40 row is pretty weak because it's going to tie your mobility, your leap, your feral lunge with Nature's Guardian. Nature's Guardian is effectively a free Hellstone every 45 seconds, which you have to give up if you want to get more mobility. This is a pretty hurtful part of your talent tree. And then the last row is a little bit disappointing, since Blizzard mentioned that they acknowledged that Feral Spirits was a weak cooldown and wasn't doing enough. That was a few weeks ago though, and Feral Spirit hasn't really been changed, so that's a pretty weak cooldown. And then you have Earthen Spike and Ascendance. Earthen Spike is not that powerful because you don't have many abilities that you can stack on top of each other and fill in this 10-second burst window. Your abilities are pretty cyclical, so Earthen Spike doesn't fit, doesn't synergize as well. Ascendance is the only one that can have a use, specifically in AoE situations. It's much stronger now that they gave it the instant active effect that it didn't have before. It's much more powerful. As a whole, that row could be improved. But when you take all of these talents, you can see there is quite a bit of variety in which way you want to do damage. You can have a Storm Strike focus build, you can even have a Lavalash focus build, you can have a build based on resetting the cooldown of Storm Strike, or maybe increasing the damage of your Flame Shock and your spread damage with your Lavalash. Other legendaries are not as interesting. Doomwinds can give you a 1 minute extra cooldown. The problem with Doomwinds is that your melee damage, your white damage, is going to be barely 10% of your total damage, and not even 5% of that is going to come from Wind Fury. So having a legendary that specializes on 5% of your damage is not very powerful, right? When Storm Strike is going to be 30% of your damage, it makes much more sense to focus on Storm Strike than it does with Wind Fury weapon. The one that could be very powerful later on, assuming and implying that Feral Spirit is going to be made stronger, is going to be Witch Doctor Wolf Bones for the cooldown reduction on Feral Spirits. If Feral Spirits was strong, this would be a very, very strong legendary, because you do gain quite a bit of Maelstrom weapon stacks, and the base cooldown of Feral Spirits is not like 4 minutes. It's not Metamorphosis, it's just 2. So 2-second reduction per Maelstrom weapon stack gained is very, very quick cooldown reduction. Unfortunately, Feral Spirits is weak, so this legendary is poor right now, but it could become much better. The one that could have, some crazy effects, obviously, is Deeply Rooted Elements. Chance to activate Ascendance whenever you Storm Strike. As I mentioned, You're not going to proc Stormbringer resets of Stormstrike as often anymore, so this is not going to have the same chances that you remember from playing Enhancement in Legion and spamming Stormstrike, but with the now instant effect that you gain from Ascendance, which is a massive amount of AoE damage, this can become very, very powerful. To give you some numbers, the active effect of Ascendance is the same damage as 2 Stormstrikes, AoE, around you, instant. So it's very powerful. One of the problems I highlighted before, which is going to be the key part in why a lot of people might not want to play Enhancement, beyond the fact that it's not flavor of the month, so they don't want to play it, is the RNG element, right? At the end of the day, your Stormbringer, resetting the cooldown of your Stormstrike, is completely RNG. Your Maelstrom weapon that allows you to unlock multiple other parts of your build is also completely RNG. And if you've been paying attention to what I said at the start, everything you click as a cooldown. You've got nothing to spam. Your shocks have a 6-second base cooldown, your Stormstrike has an 8-second base cooldown, your Lava Lash has a 12-second base cooldown, and your Crash Lightning has a 9-second base cooldown. This means that if you don't get going with your RNG, if stuff is not proccing, you can slow down. There is also the fact that Wind Fury is also RNG, obviously. 25% chance to trigger an extra attack. And that's very important to your build because Maelstrom weapon triggers off of attacks with your melee weapon, which means if your Wind Fury procs, extra attack procs, which means extra chances to proc Maelstrom weapon. But Maelstrom weapon is RNG, Wind Fury is RNG, and Stormbringer is RNG. So if you watch this video, you will see quite a few times where I do have nothing to click, basically, right? I'm just waiting because I've got nothing. Nothing is proccing. I don't have enough charges of my Maelstrom weapon stacks. My Stormstrike isn't resetting, so I'm doing nothing, right? That can happen and can feel not good. The other highlighted problem, Enhancement does need uptime. Uptime meaning how important it is for you to stick to the target. How much damage you're losing if you have to disengage from the target, even for a few seconds. As I mentioned, Enhancement is a spec that is going to gain resources by constantly auto-attacking the enemy. From Stormbringer, special attacks, from Maelstrom weapon, melee attacks, and from Wind Fury, auto-attacks. You always and constantly want to auto-attack. You're not a Demon Hunter or even an Outlaw Rogue who is completely front-loaded in their damage. Their auto-attacks are not going to give them massive amounts of resources. As Enhancement, you do really want to stick to your target, meaning having to disengage and lose some uptime is going to hurt way more. The other part as to why Enhancement might not be so popular, on top of having some RNG elements that might feel unsatisfying to go through, is the fact that it does require high focus and it does require for you to be essentially on your game at all times. You need to keep track of your Flame Shock and Frost Shock CDs, you need to keep track of your Stormstrike cooldown and Lava Lash cooldown, you have to synergize the damage increase of your Lava Lash legendary if you're using it, with the extra Lava Lash damage of your Hot Hand if you're playing it. If you're playing with the Stormstrike build, you have to use your Stormstrike and then use your Maelstrom weapon stacks to reset the cooldown of your Stormstrike so you can use Stormstrike immediately right after for massive value. For your shocks, if you're playing Ice Strike, you want to use your shock and then use Ice Strike to reset the cooldown and use shock again. If you're playing with Hailstorm, now you have to keep track of the stacks of Hailstorm for your empowered Frost Shock. And if you're playing with Ice Strike as well, you want to try to use your Ice Strike to reset your cooldown of your Frost Shock so you can use Frost Shock with consumed stack of Maelstrom weapon with Hailstorm for maximum damage. That was a lot I just went through, and it can be difficult to keep up. Meaning, if you lose focus, if you lose track of what's going on, again, you're not a Demon Hunter. You don't click Fell Barrage and I-Beam and you're at the top of the meters. There was nothing to keep up, there was no debuffs to keep up, no buffs to keep up, just click 2 buttons and you're done. This is going to require much more focus. Meaning, the more mistakes you do, the more the game is going to tell you you suck dick. And as we know, not many people want to go through that. When they play, they feel like, you know, they feel personally attacked when that happens, so they don't want to play the spec anymore, right? All in all, I do think Enhancement is going to remain a rather niche spec. I'll tell you, even if they actually got tuned and their damage was very competitive, I still don't think many people would still want to play Enhancement. Purely because of, you know, the high focus required to play the spec properly, the more mistakes being punished compared to other specs. It's not going to be very popular with many people. For people who do want a challenge, for people who don't want to feel satisfied when they pull off the rotation properly, you know, if you're tired of playing Unholy Decay, you know, putting down your Death and Decay, building up some Festering Wounds and then bursting them every single time, the same thing. For people who want some more variety and some more change in their build, in their rotation, you know, maybe going in 1 Mythic Plus where you have 2 other specs that do tons of AoE, so you want to go for single target, and then maybe 2 specs that are single target focused and you want to go full AoE, Enhancement Shaman is definitely your spec. I wouldn't say it's a beginner spec at all, so This is my suggestion for you if you were planning on playing Enhancement Shaman. This was an outlook on how Enhancement Shaman looks currently, and the next DPS spec is going to be another melee DPS spec I will be going through. We'll see which it is soon enough, I think tomorrow. So for now, this is all. I'll leave you in the comments personally offended that I called Demon Hunter easy. I'm sure there are some people wanting to argue that it's an actual big brain spec. Please be sure to laugh at them. So with this I'm done, and in the meantime I've got a flute I need to clean.